When I was a young boy, I had a model railway layout. You know, this stuff. My granddad built it and I absolutely loved it. It had the little village in the centre and everything. God knows how much time I spent playing with it and he spent building it. But sadly, time moves on. My granddad passed, I grew up, and the model railway was packed away and has been stored in a succession of lofts and cellars for the last quarter of a century since no one really had the room to set it up again. The only thing I had to remind me of its former greatness was this single Polaroid, since the whole thing was in a pretty sorry state, with each individual part being in such bad repair that you can't actually test it because everything else is broken. Like, it's hard to test if the trains are working when you're pretty sure the track isn't working, and it's hard to test if the track is working if the controller's not working either. However, I am now 37, which means I get to pick which kind of old guy I want to grow into. You know, pick my subclass, basically. And if I've got to pick between get really into military history or get really into model trains, well, I think we all know what the answer's going to be. So, to that end, for my birthday this year, my dad got me this little Valley Drifter set from Hornby. It's just a little looper track, an 040 and some rolling stock, but, importantly, we know everything in here works. Which meant I actually had something that I could test everything against and see if anything still worked. The short answer was nothing worked. Like, not a single thing. It was actually kind of impressive. But since we do a fair bit of modelling and working with old things on this channel, I thought you might be interested to see what I had to do to bring everything back to life. So let's do that. Now, whilst I have restored a lot of Warhammer minis in my time, restoring a train set is all new to me. So I started small, and the first job I did was to take out all of my freight wagons, most of which seemed to roll pretty badly, and split them into two groups. Just needs a clean, and probably needs more than a clean, and I started with that first pile. The wagons were disassembled as much as I could be bothered / dared to, and they were clean with hand soap and an old toothbrush before being rinsed in cold water. Most of them weren't that dirty, but they weren't cleaned before being put away decades ago, so any dirt they have on them is pretty old. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't aware that a mouse or something could have gotten into the box at some point over the decades and, I don't know, rubbed its dick and balls all over my mighty white bread van. I can't be having that, so it's probably best to give everything a clean. Once reassembled and a tiny bit of lubricant added to the axles, they look and feel a lot nicer, and, most importantly, they roll a lot better. Ah yeah, that's the good stuff. Now let's look at the rest of my rolling stock. The big carriages are all fine, honestly. They were kept in much safer condition, so all they really need is a little dust. So I can now turn my attention to that other freight. First, these were once again dismantled and cleaned, which really showed me exactly how inconsistent they were with adding weights to these things. Because, yeah, sometimes they add chunks of metal inside these to aid with stability, I believe, but some have them and some don't. Hell, here's two of the same brake van just in different liveries. One has a weight inside it and one doesn't. Don't look at me, I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, there were a few coupling hooks missing or horribly rusted on these, so I got some modern replacements, which were annoyingly slightly different in size to the old ones, so I had to be pretty selective where I used them. But everything has coupling hooks now, so I can't complain too much. There's also this one little wagon that's missing an entire coupling, but since this is the one in here that isn't actually made by Hornby, it's by Dapol if you're interested, I'd need to buy a pack of like 20 couplings in order to replace just one of them. So this one will just have to go at the end of a train for now. I'll look into replacing it later. Then there was this Esso truck, where the thin plastic trimming had snapped, and since the way it's constructed means that those joints are always under tension, I didn't think there was any way of gluing them back in place that wouldn't either instantly come apart again or would look kinda messy. So I figured out how to dismantle the whole thing and just trim those bits off. It's a little less visually interesting now, sure, but I think it looks a lot neater, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life worried about them coming loose again because I coughed too loudly near it. The last wagon was one that needed the most work. It's a little flat car with a car in it. A little Triumph 2000 to be specific, and it was in a state. The car was pretty rough and the flatbed was missing a guardrail, so I just removed the other one so it'd be even. There was also a bunch of guff on the bed of the truck from a sticky pad that used to be used to affix the car to it, but has now hardened and become pretty impossible to remove without damaging the rest of the thing. So I figured the best way to even all this stuff out was just to paint it myself. First I hit it with a grey primer, and then I painted it with the acrylic paints I usually use for wargaming stuff. The truck worked out pretty well, but the car needed way more coats of paint than I planned, and the varnish unfortunately did some weird stuff that I just couldn't cover up in the same way that I would if it was a Warhammer Mini. Since the painting style is just so much simpler here, there's nothing to hide behind. I'll probably redo the paint on it at some point, but it looks okay when with the other wagons for now. Now it's time to talk about the big part of the job, getting the actual locos working. I started small with these two Class 264s that were in a very mucky state. Enjoy these lingering shots of grime. Don't you feel more fulfilled now? However, I could hear, and in one case see, a little bit of life in them when I put them on the track, so I was confident I should be able to get them working again. I started with the classic Smoky Joe here, and once I figured out how to get him apart, I cleaned up the body in the same way that I did the wagons and then turned my attention to the actual mechanism. Now, I only notionally know what I'm actually doing here, but since the whole mechanism is actually very simple, all I did was just clean out any of the guff from the gears and lubed up anything that looked like it needed lubing, and hey, it looks like there's life in it after all. Just look at him go. After a bit of trial and error, I got the whole thing back together, and I won't lie, it's lovely to see it moving again. It's a bit fast, a bit loud, and sometimes needs a little bit of help if you try and be too gentle with it, but it absolutely works and has no issue with pulling a bunch of wagons around. Admittedly, the wheels do need a proper clean, but once I've picked up the stuff to properly clean them, then it should make it a little bit more reliable. The other 264, Loch Ness, sadly did not seem like it wanted to move properly, and has a habit of shorting out my controller. I managed to get some life out the motor, but the axles were so horribly rusted that it took a whole lot of WD-40 to even get them moving again. And although they're relatively free moving now, they're just seemingly too stiff for the motor to be able to move it, which is a pity. I'm sure more experienced modelers could coax this back into life, but I am not that experienced modeler. Still, all hope was not lost. I bought a modern working engine on eBay for about a tenner and took the top off. For you see, the internal workings of these little 040s haven't really changed much over the decades. In fact, the Crimson King, the one that came in the Valley Drifter set, uses a chassis that's basically identical to the old ones. They just wire up the motor a little differently. Although since the modern train set engines don't tend to have a hefty die-cast running plate of my 264s here, they have a chunk of metal inside them to give them a bit more weight, which I'll remove in this case since it wouldn't fit in the other body anyway. And after some finagling, the old Loch Ness body is on a new chassis and is once again alive. The only downside is that it no longer has the fetching burgundy wheels it used to have, and is insistent on being as fast as possible at all times. But there's a reason why trains with this mechanism have often been called pocket rockets. So, update from FutureWib, I got the old Loch Ness chassis working. After I started editing the video together, I thought that the wheels weren't that stiff, and there was a bit of life in the motor, so there must be something else wrong. And it turned out that the thing I missed was how much dirtier the wheels were than on Smoky Joe. Grabbing the most alcoholic hand sanitizer I could find, I still don't have the proper stuff to clean the wheels in case you can't tell, I gave the wheels a very quick clean, and what do you know, I started to actually see some movement, and over time it only got smoother and more reliable. Although that's when I got extra confirmation that the wheels were definitely the issue, since they were sparking like mad bastards. Which is something that's usually caused by dirty wheels. The motor was also making this noise periodically, which was less than ideal. So to cure the former, I more thoroughly cleaned the wheels, which seemed to clear up pretty much all the sparking, and after running it for a while, the noise just cleared up by itself too. I think it was just getting used to running again. I initially popped the body of the green donor loco on it, but honestly it's actually working really well now, so much so that I ended up just putting the Loch Ness body back on there, which does mean it gets its burgundy wheels back, so that's nice. And I have a whole extra working loco. It's a little bit worn, so I'm thinking I might actually have a go at repainting this one myself, but that's for another time. So yeah, I'll hand you back to Past Me, who apparently couldn't work out to clean the thing that makes contact with the thing that gives it power. Most of the rest of my trains used a different kind of motor, called a Ringfield motor, and once again I cleaned and lubricated these as best I could to mixed results. My Class 37 was initially completely dead, not even getting a hum out of it, but it seemed like the culprit was just a loose cable to the non-powered bogie. You see, these things have rubber traction tyres on the powered wheels, so in order to complete the circuit it does need to connect to the other bogie. You see, I'm now realising that this video sits in a sweet spot where, to people that know about model railways, it's all really basic and uninteresting, but to anyone that doesn't know about them, this is absolute nonsense. So, with a bit of fiddling, I got it working again. For a bit. At the point I'm making this video, this is the one train from my old collection that currently isn't working. It worked fine for a while, but when I try and use it now, all it does is hum a little and then shorts out my controller without moving an inch. Again, I am very new to this, so if you have any suggestions of how to fix this, then please let me know. I would like to see it running again. The other two trains with the same motors fared a lot better. This Intercity 125 did absolutely run after it's clean, but it's pretty slow and lacks the power to really haul around the rest of its set. I mean, it can do it, but it's obvious it's struggling. The other one was the Flying Scotsman, which was moving, yes, but very low powered, barely able to move itself, let alone pull any coaches. However, sometimes the solution is simpler than you think. Turns out I just missed a little switch on the back of my controller which was forcing things to run slower, since model trains often run faster than is realistic. Which in the case of the 125 and Scotsman was making them run slower than they could really handle. But flipping the switch and voila, they are both behaving a lot better now. And seeing the Scotsman running again is really pleasing. The two that I really wanted to get working again for nostalgia's sake was this and Smokey Joe. So having them both running again is lovely. Oh, and I removed the front coupling hook from Scotsman since I never used it anyway, and it just helps make the whole thing look a little more authentic. It's just screwed on there, so I can put it back anytime I want. Actually, the way the Scotsman works is fairly fun if you're not familiar with these things. You see, this era of Hornby steam locomotives usually put the motor in the tender rather than in the loco itself, so it's actually the tender that's pushing the loco along. I don't know, I think it's interesting. Finally, for the trains, let's look at something that is only just a train. So this is a pacer, a class 142 if you want to get pedantic about it, and pacers are a type of train that's basically a bus, as in they were literally made from a lot of bus parts. To my understanding, this model of one is very accurate to the real ones in that even before it was in storage for years, it was loud, uncomfortable, and didn't work very well. After I gave it some TLC, it was once again back to life, being loud, uncomfortable, and not working very well. Also, it was astonishingly awkward to disassemble for something so simple. Why they used two different kinds of screws is beyond me. It's also picked up this upsetting noise when running in a particular direction, which is new and great. I'm just not going to run it in that direction, I think. It's never been reliable, to be honest. I remember it cutting out all the time when I was a kid, but the saving grace is that both ends are powered, so they nudge each other along when one cuts out and keeps the whole thing moving. Honestly, I think with the clean it's had, the mechanism is running better than it ever did when it was new. Aside from the new noise. It does not relax me, does that noise. Oh, and throughout this video you might have noticed that there's a few extra bits of track that weren't in that train set. A couple of pieces are shiny and new that I bought so I could make this video look a little nicer, but a bunch of it is actually just my old track. Now, it's the old steel stuff, so a lot of it was pretty horribly corroded, but some of it wasn't too bad, and all it actually needed to work again was to rub the top of the track with some fine sandpaper and to bend the fish plates, that's the things that connect the track, back into a shape where they could actually hold something again. And it totally worked. I suddenly had a lot more track to play with, allowing me to do some shunting or have multiple trains on the layout at once that could be moved in and out of sidings to my heart's content. Also, since all my old curves were first radius curves, which are a lot tighter than the third radius curves that came in the train set, it meant that the whole thing could actually fit better on the table now, which was a plus. Now don't get me wrong, this old steel track is nowhere near as good as the new track pieces I have. The fish plates are often a bit dodgy and don't fit super well, meaning it's really easy to have a break in electrical continuity or cause derailments. Plus, it's obvious it's harder for the trains to run on it since you can tell they're a little more laboured going across it. But ultimately, I would like to replace all this older track in time anyway, so the fact that my fix is a bit rough is okay for now. The final thing I had to do was give a quick wash to the few buildings I had left that weren't too damaged, which also involved removing all the windows since they're just clear plastic that was cut out and sellotaped in there. I glued them back in place so they'd be a bit more secure, and once I added a few little guys and maybe a cow that I still had in the box, I'm done. That's everything, basically. And I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't a little special to me. Model railways are expensive. Like, Warhammer is expensive, but it's got nothing on model railways. Being able to rebuild what I have here with modern equivalents would be, well, a lot more money than I can afford. But seeing these trains from my childhood running again, and knowing it was me that got them running, means a lot more than just buying new ones. Even if, sure, those new ones might objectively run better, and wouldn't make this noise. But these are mine, and I don't know, it keeps a connection to a loved one who is no longer with us alive, which is nice. Speaking of, the one damaged building from the old layout I've kept is this one. A couple of shops built from a kit and painted by my granddad. And sure, I am a mini painter these days, I can look at it and objectively see the imperfections, but I don't know, when I was a kid this looked perfect to me, and I can't help but wonder if having this stuff around back then primed me to have a fascination with painting little things, whether they be train cars or space marines. And sure, I could repair this and repaint it to look better than ever, but I wouldn't want to. My granddad made this one, and I couldn't improve that. Hopefully, one day in the future we'll live somewhere where I can have a room where I can have a layout permanently set up again. Maybe build terrain, put ballast down, the whole shebang. Because playing around with all this has been really fun, and I have discovered a profound love of shunting, and I will not apologise for my love of shunting. So thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more train content on this channel, then, I don't know, subscribe to the Patreon, buy like a lot so we can afford to move to a bigger flat where I don't have to annoy Snipe quite so much by setting up my trains on the kitchen table.